creating cultural awareness and understanding. This is Culture Clique. Culture Clique is written and produced by KQAL FM on the campus of Winona State University.
What is a cult? To many of us, cults can be a point of mystery and confusion. One definition of a cult is a social group characterized by its unusual religious, spiritual, or philosophical beliefs and rituals. Today on Culture Clique, we speak with a former cult member, Elizabeth Perry. Elizabeth shares the isolation, confusion, and struggle she experienced, her eventual separation from her family, and the healing that came with a world that was hidden from her. I'm Jiovani Bermudez. Join us as we learn about growing up in a cult of a religious extremist through the eyes of someone who's lived through it in today's Culture Clique. I'm here with Elizabeth Perry. How are you doing today, Elizabeth?
I am great. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I want to thank you for joining us in the studio and sharing your story.
Oh, thanks for having me, man.
So, I wanted to start things off. What would you say is a cult?
Well, I think that's kind of hard to define. You know, when a lot of people think of cult, they think of like a Charles Manson-esque figure. Like,
right.
It needs a charismatic figurehead. I'm not going to go around name-dropping mainstream religions here and labeling them a cult, but there is one, and they do knock on your door, and they're not led by a single figurehead, they're led by a council. But I think pretty much everyone would agree that it's still a cult. So let's kind of try to dismantle that idea of there needs to be like a single figurehead for it to be a cult.
Right. I have the definition here, and it even says it's defined as a religion regarded as unorthodox or spurious, and another definition says a system of religious beliefs or rituals dedicated to a specific object, individual, or group. Yeah,
I think that would definitely be a lot more accurate than sort of the pop culture kind of definition of what a cult is. And it can be sort of separated from a religion in that the religion might be what unifies people, but it's sort of the beliefs and the way that they practice that religion that makes them a cult. I think one really common example is home churches. A lot of them, the FBI classifies a lot of home churches as cults.
Really?
It's one of the things that sort of pads up the statistics about how many cults there are. Because there's like several thousand cults that operate in the U.S., and it's those insular communities that make it. So it's not the church itself that makes it. It's not the fact that they practice at home, because obviously not everyone who does home church is in a cult,
right.
But it's the extreme levels of control and isolation that can often go hand in hand with it that sort of defines it as a cult.
Right. And as we know, the social definition of the word may not be the dictionary definition. You see that with a lot of words.
Yeah, connotation and denotation.
Right. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the one that you grew up in?
Sure. So the cult that I grew up in kind of falls into that definition that I was talking about earlier, in that we were part of a larger church, but that larger church was not the cult. At its peak, there were about 5 families inside of the quote-unquote cult that I was in. Mm-hmm. I would say more of like a religious extremist group with like cult ideologies. If you ever look up the Stephen Hassan bite model, it's really accurate in my experience to what cults are. Stephen Hassan is a psychologist who made a model of basically 4 different criterias of what defines a cult, pretty much, or aspects that you can look for.
Could you summarize it? Because
Sure. So BITE is behavior control,
mm-hmm.
or B is behavior control. BI is information control. T is like, it's isolation. So like if they isolate people,
mm-hmm.
and then E is entertainment. I don't know. I should have it pulled up. I don't. But essentially it goes through the 4 criterion of, do they isolate people? Do they control information? And it's sort of those criteria, like, is there a charismatic figure? Do they isolate people after they leave?
Right, I have them. I actually found it here.
There we go.
So it's behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control.
Yeah, there we go. I don't know why those didn't come to me.
Oh, no, it's all good. You know, we all have those moments where we kind of are unable to remember those small details, as I did with connotation, denotation. So let's dive a little bit into this cult of yours, just
Sure.
if you don't mind. What were some of the major beliefs?
So the major beliefs were essentially that control was like paramount, in that the father or mother, so the parents, the adults in the group knew best, and they had absolute say over everything. It was sort of a very extreme idea of we are in the world, but we're not of the world. So the best example that I tend to give people is I was 17 years old when I first talked to someone who was not either directly affiliated with the group or I was not being directly supervised. I was practically an adult when I first had a conversation that was not being monitored. And then, I was 17 or 18, and my mom was like, yeah, I have to approve the shirt that you buy with my own money. So a lot of instances of that. I would say kind of disownment. My family was very close. Like I said, there were 4 or 5 families.
Right.
My family was the smallest. We had 5 kids, and it just went up from there. I think the most had like 14.
Wow.
So it was very few adults, but a lot of children. And as the kids grew into adults, more and more of them started leaving because they realized how messed up it was. We weren't allowed to swim. If we went out in public, we had to have someone else there with us. I remember I was 12, and my mom told me specifically that I had to go outside with my brother to see what he was doing, to make sure he wasn't doing anything bad. So it's a lot of instances kind of like that of just controlling where people went, what they did. There was no, I would say, like figurehead. Like I said, it was part of a larger church.
Right.
It was just a group of those parents that kind of got together and chose to isolate themselves from the larger church because they believed they were the only ones doing it right.
Would you mind if I ask, what was the larger church that they were breaking off of?
So it's a denomination of Catholic. It's not what you think of when you think of tradition, like normal, like Roman Catholic. So it's an offshoot of that. And then we were an offshoot of an offshoot, essentially. And so we were very much isolated within a group that kind of isolated themselves. So we were 2 degrees removed from normalcy. I don't know if that's a word.
No, it's a very interesting thing to think about. It's you have the mainstream religion everyone knows, and then you have a branch off of that that'll still claim its name but doesn't necessarily have its beliefs. And then a branch off of the branch off, but still claims the name of the original. And I imagine that could be a bit of a problem because let's say if like the major religion, if you'll say in this case it's Catholicism, doesn't really have anything wrong with it, but people focus on this sect that you were in, kind of gives a bad name to the major one that they attach themselves to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of the issue with like tagging things as like cults, because that has kind of a definition, but religious extremist I feel like is a lot more nuanced, but not a lot of people understand what that is, and they're like, oh, religious extremist, like terrorist?
Right.
Yeah, because that's kind of what it's more associated with. So cult is kind of the more colloquial term, but I would say I was in a religious extremist group.
Mm-hmm. All right. You talked about the whole families can't go with you, or family has to go with you wherever you went, or monitor or approve everything. What other outlandish beliefs existed within this extremist group?
I mean, my mom firmly believed that one of our presidents was the Antichrist. But I
Which
think
one, if I may ask?
Obama.
Okay.
I don't know why. She never fully outlined her beliefs. I'm not sure if she still believes that, but that was something that was pretty common within the group. So a lot of it was us versus them taken to the extreme.
Right.
And that if you leave, you're going to be corrupted. You're going to go to hell. And, like I said, when the kids grew up, they started leaving. And when my oldest sister left, we're the only 2 girls. So she's at the top, I'm at the bottom in terms of age. So we were never close. But when she left and I got older and sort of got over the, oh, girly things are gross, having 3 older brothers will do that. We started bonding more, and my mom very much was of the idea that you have to be careful of everything your sister says because she's trying to corrupt you. And I'm like, she's my sister. She's not trying to corrupt me. She's trying to show me the world. And like, the world is not this bad, scary place and everyone's out to get you. Like I was taught, it's actually pretty awesome.
All right. So you talk about how your sister left, and it sounds like your mother didn't. Who else has left along with your older sister?
So I would say, and I might be getting ahead of myself here in that my parents have sort of disaffiliated with this group. And I would say in large part, now that all the children are grown, none of them have chosen to carry on this belief set. Or if they have, it's such a minuscule amount that it's just that one family of weirdos. So over time, my whole family has kind of disassociated, but in terms of like leaving during the peak, my sister left, my middle brother left, and then I left. Okay. In that order. So one thing that was always very common is we would never kick out our kids. We've never kicked out our kids, and that's something very common is like they chose to leave. So you can sort of maintain sort of that good persona of like, oh, bad people kick out their kids. So my sister started dating a guy who's divorced now. They're happily married. But my mom, that's like a big no-no. You're not allowed to date divorced people.
Right.
And so she and my mom got in a huge fight. And my mom essentially made it so hostile that she was unable to continue living there, either safely physically. I don't think anything would have happened physically, but definitely emotionally. It was not healthy. So my sister left. And my mom always preserved that we didn't kick her out, she left. Well, if you're making it so hostile you can't stay, you kicked someone out. And that was the same thing with my brother, is he started dating a girl who he has a kid with now. They're not married, but they wanted to go on vacation, and it was the same thing. You either do it our way or the highway, and my brother chose to leave. But again, that was them saying he chose to do it.
Right. And so would you say that seeing this when you were younger is what got you to say, like, maybe this is wrong?
Absolutely, yeah. So my mom was abused when she was a kid, and my dad was parentified. If you don't know what parentification is, it's when a child is forced to take on attributes of an adult. Like if the adult is emotionally unstable and the kid has to step up and comfort the parent, that's parentification. It's a form of abuse, and it's incredibly common inside of cults, especially when it comes to older siblings. Like you have to take care of the younger siblings. And that was very common. My mom turned to the kids that were still inside for support as the older kids acted out. And so I was the last to leave, so I was there comforting my mother through my sister leaving and my brother leaving. And then towards the tail end of everything happening with my brother, I started to realize on my own that, hey, she's not coming to me as much. She must think that I'm going to leave as well, because the 3 of us look like her and the other 2 look like my dad. And so she would always make comments about the 3 of us being so much alike. So I was like, oh, well, it's inevitable that I think I'm going to leave, that she thinks I'm going to leave. And ultimately she was right, but I think that was kind of interesting that she treated me differently after she sort of got it in her head that I was going to leave before I had even made up my decision to leave. Which was kind of interesting.
Well, I mean, now we see that you have left.
Yeah. So
once you did leave, what struggles did you have to face when you've made your decision? I
was very socially awkward. So my family used to come up here to Winona for vacation. And when I was looking at schools, I knew I had enough. I knew that I wanted to leave. And so I applied to Winona State. It was the one university that I applied to. And I got in, obviously, I'm a genius. Anyway, we applied, I got in, and then I called my brother who left and his girlfriend, and I said, hey, I think I'm going to get kicked out of the house soon. I applied to a university out of state. I have a loan and I have ROTC. So I signed up for ROTC when I came to Winona, and that really was my lifeline. It was the military. The military was going to pay for my schooling. It was going to pay for my housing. So I felt secure in my choice to leave. And my brother said, hey, that's awesome. We'll drive you up there. And my mom, she started treating me better, because once I told them, hey, I applied to a school out of state, I'm leaving, it's a lot easier for them to start, treating you better, because it's like oh my gosh, I'm going to lose control of this person. They're going to go out in the world.
Right.
They're going to get corrupted. And so they tried to get me to stay by being nicer. I wasn't really having it. And maybe this is me being callous, but I told them, you can either help me move or I can never talk to you again. Basically, like if my brother helps me move, I'll never talk to you again. But when I finally got up here, like I said, I was in ROTC, and we had an event in La Crosse for the battalion, and I went there, and everybody, was talking and making friends, and I realized, for the first time in my life, I already had an associate's degree by this point, but I realized, like, for the first time in my life, when I wasn't around people that knew my brother, because I went to the same school as my brother, I didn't know how to talk to anyone.
Right.
So I walked around for like an hour and a half, and then I sat down at a picnic table and didn't know what to do. If I thought about going up to someone I didn't know how to approach, I was like paralyzed with fear. I had no idea how to even initiate that conversation or how to keep it going. And one of the upperclassmen, one of the juniors that year, came up to me, and he sat down at the table and he talked to me. And that was like the first interaction I had. And then through ROTC, because I was in clubs while I got my associate's degree, but within clubs, it's very easy to continue being yourself. And in ROTC, that's not an option. You have to be assertive. You have to come out of your shell. You have to be able to take control of a situation. And so through the military, I've learned, to be a completely different person. I would not be sitting here having this conversation with you with my first year at Winona State. That would not be happening. And that same junior, who is now a senior, came up to me last year, and he goes, Perry, it's military, everybody goes by the last names. He goes, Perry, you are completely unrecognizable to the person you were last year. If you told me that year that I met you, that this is where you would end up, I would say you're lying. Because I didn't expect you to last in this program because of how quiet and shy you were, and you have surpassed every single expectation. So being socialized was very much the biggest issue that I had coming out, because we didn't talk to anyone. There were 4 or 5 families, right? But 4 of the families lived together in Kentucky. I'm from Southern Ohio, for reference. Right. So 4 of the families lived in Kentucky, and my family was the only one that lived in Ohio. And so
it wasn't a collective of...
No, so it wasn't within a compound. We didn't even really get together. The parents did.
Really?
But the kids did not. So within a group, so there's the Catholic Church, then there's the larger church, then there's our group, and then there's the 4 families that lived close together, and then the family that lived far away, which was my family. So
wow.
We were, extremely isolated from everyone else.
So you didn't even get to interact with even other members of this organization. You were just secluded to your family alone.
Yep. So we would see them on Sundays. But other than that, it was just too far of a drive for us to get together and meet. Other than that, the other members would have like homeschool meetings, because we were all homeschooled.
Right.
And they would have homeschool meetings, but we were, totally isolated. So yeah, I grew up not talking to anyone that wasn't either related by blood, or if I talked to someone, a family member was there with me carrying on the conversation.
Right.
So, yeah, social issues are the most.
Well, obviously, you've talked about the struggles you had coming out of there, which you obviously have come about, and, I'm happy to see that. What would you say to these people who haven't left yet, if you could say something to them right now?
I think questioning is healthy. Questioning anything, even questioning a religion, if you're perfectly happy in that religion and it's not a cult. Like, if something is giving you an icky vibe, look into it. Get to the root of why it's giving you that vibe. Look into the root of the reason. So one of the really big things that I don't think necessarily related to a cult, but I think it might have been, fostered and, enabled by it, was a lot of emotional neglect, and that, issues weren't prioritized. There was a lot of gaslighting, like, oh my gosh, this happened. No, it didn't. To this day, I maintain that my mother threatened she had a bunch of surgeries. She was not in a good headspace. She was being over-medicated. Absolutely not her fault. But she had a breakdown and she threatened to kill her kids with a knife. And to this day, she denies that it happened. I don't blame her, obviously. It was not her fault. She was being medicated totally incorrectly. But there's gaslighting that still goes on to this day. So if there are warning signs like that, look to what's facilitating it. And then don't be afraid to face the harsh truths, I think. No one wants to admit that happened to them. No one wants to admit bad things, but, you're not at fault. You're the victim. Even if you've done bad things in a cult, it's the environment that enables it to go on.
So would you say, with your parents, obviously they are part of this organization, you mentioned that they kind of went through abuse themselves and a lot of issues. So do you blame them for what happened, or do you think they're just as victims just as I was, and it's been... Yeah,
I think that's definitely the case. So my mom came from an environment with a lot of control, and so she in turn took that to mean control means love. My dad came from an environment where there wasn't enough control, and so he also took that to mean control means love. And so no one says, hey, I'm going to start a cult with my friends. I'm going to isolate my kids and control them to the point where they, can't breathe and feel like they have to get away. I think that the abuse that they went through definitely enabled that behavior, and I genuinely do not blame them. We have a working relationship, and I will never blame them for what happened, because if things had been different, they wouldn't have done it.
Right.
And they're not like that now, because now they've realized that this is actually wrong. After enough kids left and after enough kids talked to them, they're like, this is actually wrong. What we did was wrong. And they won't apologize for it. And I think that their actions have spoken louder, and their actions have said that they're sorry for it. But yeah, I think it's absolutely because they were abused.
Understood. Obviously, there's a lot of people listening. Maybe someone's in a similar boat to you. Maybe someone is in a similar boat to where you were, where they just left, or maybe they're still in. What advice would you give them, or who would you say, hey, maybe go to this person for support or something? What resources could you provide for them?
If you're in university, most colleges have a free counselor. But if you're in a situation where you have no social skills, and this is going to sound really cringy, but when I was young, I used to look up on WikiHow to talk to people. That's kind of embarrassing, and now I'm admitting it to, possibly thousands of people. So I used to look that up, and everything used to come down to, oh, just be confident. How? If I can't talk to someone, how am I going to be confident? So, the advice that I would give as someone who has been in that boat where ground zero, you have no social skills, is push yourself to join something you never thought you would do. I never thought I would be in the military. I'm going to be an officer in a year, and I never thought I would be in that boat. Push yourself. I'm not saying join the military, but if you really like knitting and there's a knitting club that you've always wanted to be a part of, go join it. you're going to be bad at it. It just is. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be rough.
Right.
You're going to feel like such an outcast, but there are people who will understand and don't lead with it on your sleeve. That was something else that I learned, is when I was young, I used to entirely define myself as what I had been through. Mm-hmm. And that's the worst thing you can do when you're trying to get away from it. Okay. So,
Right.
Yeah, I would say just push yourself. You're going to be bad. Just accept the fact that you're being bad at it, and take the approach to life of every day when I wake up, it's going to be the best day ever, and it's going to be better than yesterday.
Your story reminds me of an old quote. I'm not sure if you ever heard this. It says, "From every forest fire, there's ashes left for a new forest to grow." And the idea is that within every tragedy, something good can come out of it, or something good will come out of it. And really, your story is really something else. It's incredible to hear the amount of progress you made. We often see stories like this, and we always think they end in tragedy. But you're a living example of, I went through this, and I was able to make it. And I know there's people out there who are in the same. I want them to succeed as well.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful story, really.
Yeah, I mean, just keep pushing forward. As the first sergeant at the reception, the 43rd reception unit at Fort Leonard Wood told me once, today's going to be the best day ever. And that's the only advice you need to get through life. So that's the advice that I would give someone.
Well, I do want to thank you, Liz, for being here and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks again to Liz Perry for sharing her story today on Culture Clique. If you'd like to learn more about Liz's story, go to winonan.org, where you can find an article written by Sophia Saylor on Liz's experience. To keep up with all things Winona and the surrounding area, tune in to Culture Clique, Thursdays at 12:30 right here at 89.5 KQAL. I'm Jiovani Bermudez.
Creating cultural awareness and understanding. You've been listening to Culture Clique. Support for Culture Clique is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Culture Clique is produced by KQAL FM on the campus of Winona State University. For more information, look us up on the web at kqal.org. And thanks for listening to Culture Clique.